At the very end of Annie Hall, the Oscar-winning Best Picture in 1978, the main character, Alvy, played by Woody Allen, crosses paths again with Annie on the Upper West Side. They had loved and laughed and struggled, but their romance was star-crossed and ended with heartache. After an awkward but tender exchange, they say goodbye once again, and we hear a voiceover spoken by Alvy as he watches Annie melt away into the depths of Manhattan. "After that, it got pretty late," Alvy says, "and we both had to go. But it was great seeing Annie again, right? I realized what a terrific person she was, and how much fun it was just knowing her, and I thought of that old joke, this guy goes to a psychiatrist and says, 'Doc, my brother's crazy. He thinks he's a chicken.' And the doctor says, 'Well, why don't you turn him in?' And the guy says, 'I would, but I need the eggs.' Well, I guess that's pretty much how I feel about relationships. They're totally irrational and crazy and absurd but I guess we keep going through it because, most of us need the eggs." That small monologue goes a long way toward explaining why, just as Judy and I were about to become empty nesters, I finally agreed to adopt a rescue dog. I needed the eggs. Let me explain. Albie is one of many thousands of rescue dogs that are part of a great migration of shelter and street dogs that make their way primarily from southern states and the Caribbean to forever homes, mainly in the Northeast, every year, a migration facilitated by legions of tireless, big-hearted people devoted to saving as many dogs as possible. I wrote about one such group of people in my last book, Rescue Road, One Man, 30,000 Dogs, and 1,000,000 Miles on the Last Hope Highway. If you have read Rescue Road, you will find the basic outline of Albie's story familiar, but some of it bears repeating here to provide context, especially since not everyone listening to this audiobook will have also read Rescue Road. The one man of the subtitle is Greg Maley of Zanesville, Ohio, who, over more than a decade, has logged more than 1,000,000 weary miles in a tractor-trailer to deliver dogs like Albie from the mean streets and high-kill shelters of the Deep South and into the arms of loving families. But for every lucky dog that gets that ride to freedom, countless others perish. The canine overpopulation problem is vast. There are over 1,000,000 strays living on the streets of Houston alone. I knew nothing of this when we decided to adopt a rescue dog, not the size of the problem or anything about the networks of people working to save them. All I knew was that, based on some photographs, a short video, and a conversation with Carrie Toth, Albie's adoption coordinator with Connecticut-based Labs for Rescue, we had committed to giving Albie a home, a forever home. In fact, it came as a surprise when I learned Albie wasn't in Connecticut and that we couldn't just drive down from Boston and pick him up the next day. We had to wait a couple of weeks until Carrie, who is based in Alexandria, Louisiana, and where Albie had been in a high-kill shelter for 5 months, could get him on Greg Maley's truck. Since we were already in love from watching his little video over and over, the days passed slowly. Even when he reached Massachusetts, we had to wait 2 additional days because the state requires rescue dogs coming from out of state to be quarantined for 48 hours and re-examined by a veterinarian before they are released. Even though every dog coming into the state has to have an interstate health certificate signed by a veterinarian in the state of origin, the state insists on the quarantine. What could Albie have been making of it all? He went from wandering alone on a deserted country road to a cell-like enclosure in a noisy shelter for 5 months, into a kennel on a big truck with no clue where he was going, and, once again, into another shelter, only to be picked up 2 days later by a family he'd never met, but with whom he would spend the rest of his life. Judy had wanted a dog since before we had kids, and when we had kids, they, too, of course, wanted a dog. But I was steadfast. I knew, despite the promises, that the lion's share of the work, especially early morning walks on sub-zero mornings across sheets of ice so a dog could poop, would be my job. Judy isn't exactly what you'd call a diligent housekeeper, so I knew it would also fall mostly on me to vacuum up the shed fur, wipe off the muddy paws, and pick up the dog toys strewn about the house. When our boys were little and keeping the house in order was a full-time job, it was my job. I changed sheets, vacuumed carpets, organized toys over and over and over, pulled Legos out of toilets, and generally tried to keep the house from descending into utter chaos.